Doctor Who Season by Season. Series 10 Review. Series 10 of televised fan fiction New Who aired in 2017. It was the third and final season to star Peter Capaldi as the 12th Doctor, and the first and only full season to star Pearl Mackie and Matt Lucas as his companions Bill Potts and the android Nardole. Series 10 was also the sixth and, mercifully, final season to be overseen by controversial showrunner Steven Moffat, now the second longest producer in the history of the series after 80s guru John Nathan Turner. It is no secret that I am often a vocal critic of the new series, and the Moffat era, after a solid enough beginning, quickly went on to become my least favorite period of the series to date, with Series 7, 8 and 9 getting my vote as the bottom three worst seasons of the program ever made. Could Series 10 make the Moffat era go out with its head held higher, or would it just be more of the same old shit? Series 10 begins with the pilot, which introduces new companion Bill Potts. As noted in my initial reaction video at the time, this is a solid if unremarkable episode that introduces Bill as a solid if unremarkable companion. Following the previous dreadful 3 seasons however, and after years of the odious Clary Mary Sue Oswald, my least favorite companion in the history of the program, solid and unremarkable feels like an enormous breath of fresh air in terms of both Bill and the program as a whole. But would this feeling persist for the rest of the year? The next story is Smile, written by Frank Cottrell Boyce, who scripted Series 8's hilariously awful In the Forest of the Night, or, as known by many in fandom today, In the Forest of the Shite. I thought it was quite good, actually. Nothing especially original, the Happiness Patrol meets the Empty Child, basically, but quite solid and entertaining. Capaldi already seems far more like the Doctor this season than he's pretty much ever been allowed to before while playing second fiddle to Bloody Clara, and Bill is continuing to be perfectly acceptable too at this point. The next story is Thin Ice, written by Sarah Dollard. Dollard wrote Face the Raven, one of the few episodes of Series 9 to not make me want to tear my own face off, so I had high hopes for this one. But oh dearie me, what a disappointment. After 2 okay-ish episodes this was back to the shits. Insanely boring and laden with so much right-on political correctness I felt the bile not so much rise in the back of my throat as begin spurting out of my nose. Thin Ice is one of the worst episodes of the season. The next story is Knock Knock, written by new writer Mike Bartlett. This was again actually quite decent, certainly a relief after the abomination that was Thin Ice. A solid enough fun horror episode with David Suchet giving good villain, spoiled slightly by it being incredibly rushed in true new series style, taking so much time to set up the flat-sharing scenario that by the time the horror kicks off, there's barely any time to enjoy it before it's time to get to the resolution. It's also spoiled by the utterly unnecessary bring everyone back to life ending. For fuck's sake New Who, you finally have an episode with some decent horror content, only to cop out on it at the end. This show really needs someone with actual balls running it again. Even the Davis era had more balls than this. The next story is Oxygen, written by Jamie Matheson. Matheson wrote Mummy on the Orient Express and Flatline, the 2 best episodes of the otherwise almost completely shite Series 8, and 2 of the best Capaldi stories. He also co-wrote, with Moffat, Series 9's cringeworthily bad The Girl Who Died. So which Jamie would we get this year? Well fuck me a kipper, another good episode. In fact, this was the best episode thus far and one of the best of the season as a whole, not least because it doesn't cop out and bring all the dead crew members back to life at the end. A very solid and entertaining horror story with a good science fiction rationale behind it all. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Indeed, it was at this point that I really started to like Nardole too. The next episode is Extremis, written by Steven Moffat. This is actually the first part of a 3-part story, and one of the most controversial elements of the season. This episode, despite being cursed with the presence of the castrated master, not exactly my favorite character, is another one I actually really enjoyed. It's a little confusing at times, but explained enough by the end, so fair play. A good central science fiction idea, scary monsters, and the sense of a genuine threat approaching Earth for the first time this season. If the rest of the story had lived up to this, it could have been something very special. Could have been. The second part of this story arc is The Pyramid at the End of the World, written by Steven Moffat and Peter Harness, whose two previous stories, Killer Moon in Series 8 and the hilariously awful Zygon two-parter in Series 9, did not exactly set my fan world on fire. I thought this was okay, not as good as the previous few episodes. I could definitely have lived without the fucking moronic President of Earth silliness. Do we really want to be reminded of the god-awful Series 8 finale? I don't think we do, but it was solid enough. The use of the Doctor's blindness to get to the end point was clever, but I'm not sure I buy Bill doing it. I just don't see Bill being close enough to him at this point to really sell out the entire planet to save him. I could see Rose doing that, certainly, and even Amy probably, but Bill. In the end, though, this was part 2 of a 3-part story, and it all depended on the conclusion. That conclusion was The Lie of the Land, written by Toby Whithouse. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Well, that was a bit of a waste of time, now wasn't it? Rushed, half-baked and underdeveloped. This is a terrible conclusion to the arc and effectively torpedoes the previous 2 episodes as well by being so utterly pointless. The monks ended up much ado about nothing, and the bizarre decision to do the equivalent of an old-school 6-parter but with different writers handling each installment results in over 2 hours of screen time, not so much as having even one fully developed guest character in the whole thing. Frankly, I suspect Moffat had the idea for Extremis and then had no idea where to go with it from there. Even Bill was starting to get rather bland and boring at this point, though this seems to have been more the fault of the writing for her than the actress. The next story was The Empress of Mars, written by New and Moffat-era stalwart Mark Gatiss. I rather enjoyed this one, certainly a vast improvement on the Monks trilogy. What a pain in the rear and waste of time that all was. Given this seems to be Gattiss's last script, new showrunner Chris Chibnall is bringing in a whole new raft of writers, apparently, and not before time. It's a good one to finish on. A few new series-related niggles aside, it was rushed, and the arc plot unnecessarily butted in. This was a very enjoyable slice of refreshingly unpretentious old-school fun with some cliched but fun guest characters. Nice to see the guy from New Tricks in it, and he was good too. Not bad at all, probably joint with Oxygen as the best of the season to date. This was a much better Ice Warrior episode than Series 7's overrated and tedious as fuck Cold War as well. And I can't believe they brought Alpha Centauri back. The next story was The Eaters of Light, written by Rona Munro, who wrote the final story of the classic series back in 1989, the superlative 7th Doctor Tale Survival, and marking the first time ever that a classic series writer has returned to write something for the fanfiction new series. Oh dear, is all I can say. I wasn't expecting Rona Munro to be able to get anything anywhere near as good as Survival out under the current regime, but I wasn't expecting it to be that bad either. There was a reasonable enough idea in the somewhere, but it was woefully underdeveloped and simultaneously very slow and rushed at the same time, coming across as very boring. The guest characters were typically non-existent, and of the regulars Matt Lucas appeared to be the only one with any kind of personality. Even Capaldi was phoning this one in, and also appeared to have regressed to his Series 8 unlikable persona rather than the far more engaging Mad Professor character they'd finally settled on this season. That little It's Called charm aside only shows up how wrong it is for the weirdo alien companion to have more of it than the leading man. And what the fucking hell was that fucking shit with talking crows? Most embarrassingly dumb fuck thing since the moon being an egg and those forest fairies in Series 8. Does anyone remember this show is supposed to be science fiction anymore? Woeful. The next story is the two-part season finale, written by Steven Moffat. The first episode is World Enough and Time. All I can say about this episode is, wow. Fucking wow. Aside from some typical cringe-worthy humor and Moffat trolling early on, this was actually excellent, probably the best episode for about 6 sodding years, to be honest. Dark, scary, great doom-laden atmosphere, a very impressive return for the original Cyberman, certainly not something I would have ever expected to see on TV in 2017. It was great to have John Sim back too, and I loved him doing inanely and spending nearly the entire episode in disguise before ripping off his mask for the big reveal. I actually watched that again almost as soon as it had finished, which isn't something I've done for many a year. I've hardly been able to bear watching most of them once the last few years, let's face it. Terrific. Needless to say, I was however very concerned that Moffat would make Part 2 a complete and utter clusterfuck. Part 2 of this story, and the final episode of Series 10, is The Doctor Falls. It was quite good, I guess. Nowhere near as good as the first episode, predictably, and back to the usual New Who spectacular, but as far as that goes, it was actually okay. Certainly the best finale since the Big Bang, all there were way back in Series 5. All a bit messy and bloodless but entertaining enough thanks to the cast. I do hope Sim comes back again sometime. Bill's fate was well done, and I actually saw it coming after the previous episode. Some people are annoyed by that, but at least it was set up in the season premiere, and it would have been too grim by far to have had her stay and die as a Cyberman. I'd have loved Clara to stay dead, not just because I hated her guts, but because she did bring it on herself with her own hubris and recklessness. Bill in no way deserved the horrendous treatment she was dished out in this story, so I'm very glad she got her happy ending with Heather. Call me a slushy old fuck. And then we get the bizarre cliffhanger with the 12th Doctor trying to repress his regeneration before being confronted by the bizarre image of a silly old fart cosplaying William Hartnell in the middle of a snowstorm. I mean, what the fuck? Kidding aside, I am really not sure about this Bradley thing, though. I find it vaguely irritating that Moffat avoided using the classic Doctors like the plague in the 50th, 30 seconds of Tom, and then suddenly decides to have a multi-Doctor story with a classic Doctor in Capaldi's regeneration story, and then, to rub salt in the wound, elects to recast a dead man rather than use any of the real classic Doctors whose actors are still actually bloody alive. I also was not that impressed with Bradley's performance in the first Doctor scenes in An Adventure in Space and Time, and his delivery of the original, you might say, was piss weak even in comparison to Richard Herndl. Never mind Bill. All in all, Series 10 was okay. It was a massive improvement on the utterly dire 3 previous seasons just by virtue of being an average, passable enough season, if nothing extraordinary. Still very glad we have only one episode to go and this era will finally be over though. I give New Who Series 10 a frankly astonishing at this point, B-.